Hey everyone, back again. Today I'm going to tell you about phenomenology, which is just the study of appearances, really in its most basic form, but there's a lot more to it than that. I'm going to break it down by presenting four key figures in the history of phenomenology. That is Immanuel Kant, Martin Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Sara Ahmed. And I'm going to explain how they all differ in order to give you the most holistic, broad view of phenomenology that I can. But before jumping into it, hi, I'm David. I explain philosophical concepts and ideas and ways to make them accessible to you. So if you're new here, you can like, share, subscribe, see videos I release probably more like every 2 weeks now because I'm busy, but they're still going to be coming. If you found this on YouTube, you're going to be able to find it as just a podcast on pretty much any podcast platform, same name, same titles, all this stuff. If you found this as a podcast, you can find the video of it on YouTube if you're into that. If you want to help me out, do all those things I just mentioned, like, share, subscribe, leave a review. That'd help me out a lot. You can help me out monetarily via Patreon or PayPal, but take care of yourselves first, or more importantly, consider donating to one of the organizations below to help Palestinians and Lebanese in need from the Israeli apartheid regime. So keep that, at the forefront of your minds and consider donating if you can. Now, we got a lot to cover here, so let us go through the history of phenomenology. Now, obviously, this list is not exhaustive. I've just selected who I think are the key thinkers in the history of phenomenology. Notable exception, Edmund Husserl. Just because I think it would take too long and I chose Heidegger instead. Husserlians might not like that, but go and read Husserl. And I've covered each of these thinkers except Merleau-Ponty on this channel, and you can go and see all of the more detailed breakdowns I've done of their work if you're more interested in a broader, more in-depth analysis. Now let us start with Immanuel Kant. And remember, phenomenology is the study of phenomena. And we largely have to attribute this to Immanuel Kant. Some people might say Descartes. Whenever I say Descartes in French, people lose their minds. Y'all really don't like that. So Descartes, when we talk about phenomenology, maybe we should start with Descartes. Maybe we should even start with Plato. But I'm choosing to start with Kant because he opens up a discussion about phenomena. And what are phenomena? They're a strange thing. Well, in order to understand this, we got to break down his first critique, the critique of pure reason. Now, in the critique of pure reason, he really sought to rethink his entire approach to the history of philosophy. And he starts out by really musing on experience and the importance of experience in the world. So if you go back and think about Descartes, one of his really important ideas is, I think, therefore I am. Now, without getting into the nitty-gritty of that, essentially what Descartes is saying is that I can only be sure of my own mind because I can doubt everything around me. I can doubt if all that stuff around me is here. I can doubt even if my body is here, but I can't doubt my own mind because I need my mind to doubt. Now, Kant reads this and he's like, what? Are you just pretending like you can just bracket yourself off from the world as though you're just this mind? No, that's not true at all. Your mind, you think in a language. You only acquire a language through experience. You think in images. You only acquire these things through experience. And so Kant starts out his first critique to be like, what is the role of experience in framing my understanding of the world and myself and possibly even God? And he starts out by saying that in what's called the transcendental aesthetic, that in order for experience to take place, we must exist and see things in space and time, which he calls pure forms of the intuition. And they permit us to see sensible objects of intuition. Now, if you're listening to this and you're saying, of intuition, what do you mean? You don't mean space and time are just out there? Not for Immanuel Kant they are. That is, for Immanuel Kant, space and time don't exist out there per se, but are rather baked into our minds, baked into our bodies. And that is because when we are born, nobody sits us down and is like, oh, now you must understand this alien foreign thing to you, space and time, and we will train you how to do that. No, as human beings, we just kind of have a sense of space and time. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. I'm just being very introductory about it here. But he sets this up as the important condition for which experience, or upon which experience can take place. That is, experience must happen in space and time. Now, when we engage with things in space and time, And if we know that space and time are kind of like parts of our mind in how they actually conceptualize the world and things in the world, like especially in the case of time, time doesn't really exist. It's more our mind attributing a kind of sequential narrative to things. Again, a lot more to it than that. But we experience things in space and time, but because space and time themselves don't really exist out there neutrally, that means then that even the objects we encounter in space and time aren't really existing out there neutrally. Now, a little asterisk, we're going to problematize this. But he says that when we encounter something, we are only encountering it through our senses, and then our minds are deciphering it and giving us an image of it, giving us a taste of it, giving us, telling us what it sounds like. But we never really know what that thing looks like, sounds like, feels like, tastes like in itself. We only know what our bodies, which are, we are material, we are finite, we are our own specific kind of being, what our bodies permit us to experience. Therefore, we don't actually have a pure, true understanding of the world. We only encounter what he calls phenomena. Now, he contrasts this with that real thing. So if I am holding an apple, I have certain sensations about this apple, certain things about it, like it's maybe a red apple, it tastes a certain way, it feels a certain way. I am encountering something in the world. All of those qualities might not be true to the apple itself. It's only true to me as a human being. And I'm trying to, or maybe even to me as an individual, and I'm trying to make sense of this apple. And Kant is like, we can acknowledge that there is something about the apple that's just not available to us, that we'll never know. But he's like, we shouldn't burden ourselves trying to find that truth. Instead, we should study this mode of experience of this apple. And so we encounter things in the world. And by virtue of that, we are encountering ourselves in the world. Because when we see things, we aren't seeing things as they are. We're seeing things as our mind makes them out to be. So phenomenology is the study of appearances. It is the study of phenomena. And therefore, for Immanuel Kant, it would be the study of ourselves, insofar as we are the creatures that are giving that thing a kind of image, a kind of face, a taste, a shape. All of its characteristics come down to the way our minds process those things. And the same applies, he says, to ourselves. The only way we know ourselves is by looking at ourselves, by feeling ourselves, by smelling ourselves. That's how we know ourselves. But as human beings, then, we are both things in ourselves, things in themselves, but we're also phenomena. So we can apply the same kind of analysis and study to ourselves in the way that we are constructed in our own minds. Who knows what my body, what I am like in itself, outside of human perception? How does a cat perceive me? How would a different species on a different planet many galaxies away perceive me? Who even knows? How does the universe perceive me? Can it perceive? I don't know. How would a god perceive me? I don't know. Nobody knows. And so we are subject to the same kind of limitations. Now, that is Immanuel Kant, kind of one of the first really important contributors to the field of phenomenology. Now let's move to Martin Heidegger. And Martin Heidegger has a lot of problems with Immanuel Kant's ideas. And that is, for Martin Heidegger, he's like, as human beings, we don't just fall into the world. He actually kind of says we do. But we don't just fall into the world and are totally like, we're just these kind of blank slate-ish, except for having these basic faculties of experience. He's like, we aren't just these blank slate things that need experience to then learn how to exist as human beings, like through our gradual accumulation of sense data. Heidegger's like, when you enter the world, you are immersed in what he calls a world. You fall into a certain kind of way of being in the world. So as human beings, it's not as though we're all just the same in the way that we are oriented in the world. We are actually shaped by our environment, which is a very reductive way to frame Heidegger's ideas. But just as a starting point, he says we are shaped by our environment. And so for Heidegger, that will determine what we can even experience in the world. So Immanuel Kant just says that there are things in the world and we just see them and they're just neutrally there for us and we kind of make sense of them with our own minds. And Heidegger's like, do we really see everything in the world? Do we really see even our own world? And he gives the example very famously of a hammer. And he's like, when you're building something with a hammer, you hammering away at something, you actually lose your sense of the hammer. You actually even lose your sense of what you're doing until the hammer breaks. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what was I doing? Wait, what role did this thing serve that had actually disappeared from my mind? It was just part of your world. It had become almost transparent to you. What then goes on in these moments where things suddenly become visible, where things suddenly become apparent? And through that, Heidegger says that it reveals the extent to which that by being immersed in a world is not to encounter just neutral objects, but it's to encounter things that actually kind of disappear to us and become part of us. Now, as human beings, we not only, as Kant says, harbor the ability or contain the ability to decipher the world, to organize the world, and so on, we are always in the process of creating a world. We are always in the process of contributing to a world, to a society, maybe another way I can put it. That's not how he's doing it, but just for the sake of clarity, maybe. We are always participating in a world. We aren't just like, randomly moving around and just, oh, that's a fun object. Let me enter that into my, sense data, sense robot experience. Heidegger's like, no. We actually, some things might not even be perceptible to us if they are outside of our world. And so there's a lot more to factor in than just our embodied experience of perception, as Kant seems to think. Now, for Heidegger, how this also manifests is the acknowledgement that we don't exist in space in the way that Kant says, where Kant says that, yeah, we need space as a kind of a space or as a kind of background to see things, to experience them. Where Heidegger says that actually, to be human means to constantly try to despatialize, to bring things together, to bring things to yourself and to make them part of yourself, not by always acknowledging a kind of distance, but by bringing space together. And hence his emphasis less on space and more on time. Whereas humans, in our experience of the world, time is what configures us and determines how we will live in that world. Specifically, the knowledge that one day we will die, that time is going to catch up to us, and one day there will be an end, and so we must therefore work to build worlds, to work together, to satisfy some kind of human urge in that world. So for Heidegger, phenomenology would be not only to study human experience, in experiencing phenomena, but really how worlds shape what can even count as phenomena. What is even recognizable to us? What is, what falls to the background versus what is kind of made apparent to us? There's fancy German words for this. I don't want to burden you with that, but that is his concern, and that's what his phenomenological approach would be. Now from here we move into Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who is an extremely important French intellectual writing in the mid-20th century, and he had very important ideas about phenomenology. But one of his most important ideas from the phenomenology of perception was that he thought that all the previous phenomenologists, except for kind of Husserl, he really pulls from, like Heidegger and Kant and even Descartes, he's like, these people just take for granted that there is a world out there, that outside of us, there is this thing called a world. And in doing so, he says that they all kind of forget the way that we are truly embodied and how this world is just a purely subjective experience. That is, it is only permitted to us through our bodies, which are entirely our own. And so with all of these other thinkers, there seems to be, even when they're trying to get away from this pure reliance on the mind, they seem to always fall into that trap in elevating the importance of the mind in configuring the world for us. When really for Merleau-Ponty, he's like, you can just look at it in the way that babies interact with the world, the way that people with differing levels of ability move through and engage with the world, and how those worlds kind of exclude them in a lot of cases. But you cannot bracket off the body in these moments. And so he opens up a whole different route to think about phenomenology, less as the study of us framing the world through our minds, and then by studying the world, we're really studying ourselves. He's like, we have to look at our bodies and look at what our bodies make available to us in the world. And because our bodies have this ability to take in the world, he says that they are a sign of a kind of pre-conscious understanding that we possess as humans of the world, as really made evidenced by our bodies' orientations and dispositions in that world. How we move through it, how we feel things, how we taste things, all subjectively, and how this comes to even configure who we are. And it only happens through embodied experience, and it moves us. And this is how we actually develop our sense of self, how we develop a sense of the world itself through our bodies. So whereas Kant says that space is necessary to have experience, and Heidegger says that actually experience means shrinking space, bringing things close to us, making them part of our world, Merleau-Ponty kind of finds a middle ground, which some people might disagree with, but I just like to think of it that way. Finds a middle ground in that he's like, he doesn't want to completely do away with space, as Heidegger does. He doesn't want to completely say that it's a necessary component, but instead he says that it is framed by our bodies. That is, it is through our bodies inhabiting something that we like to call space. It'll look totally different for different people. Someone's experience of space when they feel claustrophobic in their bodies, a real emotional embodied response, is very different from somebody who is, out in the middle of the desert somewhere. Their sense of space is totally different. So it's not as though it's this neutral, objective thing that our mind creates, like Kant says, nor is it something that is always being shrunk, but it's somewhere in between. It depends on the person. It depends on their bodies. And so Merleau-Ponty opens up a new kind of subjective experience of phenomenological investigations that doesn't try to develop like a science about it per se. He kind of does, but he doesn't really try to develop a science about it per se that is universally applicable, but that is purely subjective. And that is what unites us. We can find commonality with ourselves in our different experiences, yet acknowledging that all those experiences derive humanly from embodied subjective experience. So we are universally bound in our capacity for subjective embodied experiences. And phenomenology then for him is that study of the way that our bodies as subjective embodied things experience the world. And so it doesn't try to create this universal narrative about it, but opens up a very specific subjective understanding. Now finally, let's consider Sara Ahmed and her book Queer Phenomenology, and really all of her books kind of take up this topic in more or less detail. And this is a super important text in which she challenges everyone that came before her. One of her main targets is really Husserl as well. Makes me think I should have talked about Husserl, but whatever. You kind of get that through Merleau-Ponty. But essentially, Sara Ahmed says, how do all these people before her just think that, there's a universal possibility of experience, like with Kant, and that things appear to us because of our, the way that our minds are constructed. Heidegger's like the process of building worlds. Merleau-Ponty is like, no, it's truly subjective individual experiences of the world. Sara Ahmed's like, what about those people who are denied the opportunity to actually experience the world? What about those people who are systematically denied the possibility of even being recognized in a world? So what she does in her text called Queer Phenomenology is essentially to queer phenomenology. It's to problematize the basic foundations of phenomenology as relying upon or suggesting that there is this universal subjective experience, that there is a mind constituting those experiences, and that those experiences are geared towards creating equitable communal worlds. Where she's like, what about power? What about experiences where, for example, queer youth are denied the opportunity to actually feel at home, to feel in a space, to occupy a space where they can just, have this neutral phenomenological experience? What about in the case of trans people who are denied the opportunity to live even in the body that makes sense to them? And by opening up these questions, he's like, phenomenology has long claimed that it is a neutral science of subjective experience. But she's like, actually, phenomenology participates in erasing all of those people and experiences who are denied access to worlds. And so they are forced, in a lot of cases, a really great book on this is all of Halberstam's work, but really Queer Temporalities, where Halberstam looks at the ways that queer people are forced to essentially create new worlds, new pathways, new orientations that break from dominant life scripts. And it is through that that a kind of new phenomenology is made possible. And Sara Ahmed is not trying to do away with phenomenology, but is really trying to expand it and to be like, let's take this all the way. Let us really consider subjective experiences, which means considering those experiences of migrants, of refugees who are continually being denied the possibility of being in a world, of having their own understanding of space and time and everything else recognized as a possible universal component of human experience, because Kant is really just speaking to a very European idea about sequential progress in time and space just existing around us in this neutral way that, our minds frame. Not everyone believes that. What about people whose ideas about their sense of self and belonging and experience in the world are filtered through an understanding of God and religion? Are these somehow not as valid? That is what Sara Ahmed is trying to do when she tries to queer phenomenology. Now, what are those people who break away from, a heteronormative life script? Where the heteronormative life script in America, for example, is like you go to school and then you're going to go to college and then you're going to meet your spouse and then you're going to get married and then you're going to get the good job, or in some order like that. Then you're going to have the big house and then you're going to have the 2.3 kids and then you're going to have the white picket fence and you're going to have the dog and then you're going to retire and then you're going to die. All the people that fall outside of that or who are excluded from that, therefore have totally different experiences and are worthy of as much investigation and understanding in adding these experiences to what it means to be human, which is what phenomenology is. As I said at first, phenomenology is the study of phenomena, which means the study of ourselves, because things in the world don't really exist out there per se, rather they're constituted by us. But we must take that further to also consider the way power will determine who can actually have experiences in this world, whose experiences are discredited, whose experiences are elevated as being the neutral, objective ones that stand in for all of humanity. And for example, one of the examples that Sara Ahmed loves to give and that I like to give is from Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks. When he's talking about the experience of being in France as a black man from Martinique, being in France on a train, and how hyper visible he is in that space, being a black man. And he's like, I don't actually occupy a body in those moments. He's like, he describes being disembodied. But more than that, he's like, I'm not only seeing myself disembodied in the third person. He's like, in the way that everyone looks at me, it feels like I'm taking up the space of three bodies, like as though I'm some kind of an aberration in the world occupying three different bodies. And he uses this to essentially problematize the idea that as human beings just engage with things in the world neutrally, just see the world neutrally, and we're all kind of the same in that way. It's like, no, power will really configure and determine legacies of racism and colonialism, will determine what people see and how they experience and approach others in the world. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If there's anything I got wrong or anything I omitted, add it to the comments. I mean, get a narrative going. I'd like to hear what everyone else has to think. But yeah, if you like what I did, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. Who knows? They might get a kick out of it. Who knows? I have a soothing voice. Maybe I can help them fall asleep and put me on their earbuds, and they can drift off into perfect bliss. But in any case, hope you liked it. Take care.